My name is Fred Borsch, full name Frederick Houk Borsch, full title the Right Reverend Frederick Houk Borsch. I can throw in doctor too if you want, so I do have a PhD. And I have been the chair of Anglican Studies here at the Lutheran Theological Seminary since the fall of 2003. I technically still hold that title. I consider myself retired fully now, but they've asked that I keep the title for a while since there's no one to fill the chair. There's somebody here to do a lot of the teaching and as director of Anglican Studies, but they're waiting for that person, I think, to become full professor, so that my hope is that she will then fill that chair. But I also served as professor of New Testament and still do teach both New Testament and some Anglican studies. Although, again, I claim that I'm fully retired. And also, I gather that today, since is the official day of the naming of the chair, which is very kind and generous of the seminary, that I can no longer hold the chair. So I guess I will be a little bit adjunct faculty after that. I actually do have a chair, by the way. I did several years ago. I think it was when John Paul was getting a chair. I turned to the president of the seminary and said, well, I never got a chair. He said, well, do you want one? And I said, yeah, I'd like a chair. So I have a chair at home that I sit in at Lutheran Seminary. I retired as the Bishop of Los Angeles, the Episcopal Bishop of Los Angeles, on the 31st of January in 2002, and found myself reemployed within 3 weeks. What happened was that there was a debacle at the, unfortunate actually in many ways, but at the Berkeley Divinity School at Yale. The dean was no longer the dean, and they needed somebody to come and fill in that post who is important in relationship with the Yale Divinity School too, because the schools are really fully merged, and the dean is the associate dean of the Yale Divinity School and so forth. And I had experience as head of a theological seminary. I taught in other theological seminaries. I was a bishop. And I guess they thought that they really needed somebody with that kind of position. Plus, I taught in universities too. So, and as a Princeton man, I wasn't at all awed by Yale, which probably helped a little bit. A joke. And so anyway, I went to do that and did that for about a year and a half in order so that they could get a new dean. It was work in a way, because the relationship between the two schools had been somewhat damaged and need to be restored. But in a sense, it wasn't all that difficult, because the institutions really wanted to get along, and the healing, I think, that was necessary took place. And so I did that, and also did some teaching, and in a sense was getting back to what I started off doing in ministry, teaching in theological seminaries. And I enjoyed that, and I had arranged with Yale to stay on a semester and be a visiting professor there. But at that point, I can't quite remember why, but I heard from Charles Bennison. I'd known Charles Bennison, who was the bishop here in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, for many years as a young man, and he once was a priest in the Diocese of Los Angeles for a little time when I was bishop there. And he told me about the chair of Anglican Studies, which they were going to found at this here at the Lutheran Theological Seminary at Philadelphia, and which I knew a little bit about the seminary because I'd once taught at General Seminary, and there back in the early 70s when there was some conversation about much more cooperation. I don't think it was talk about merger and so forth. I also knew that there had once been a Episcopal seminary here in Philadelphia, and that there'd been talk at one time about it merging with the Lutheran Seminary, but as you know, it actually merged with the seminary up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So, and I'd lived in Princeton for 8 years and came over to Philadelphia from time to time, so I knew something about the situation, but actually very little, so I wasn't at all sure whether this was right for me. But Charles said, well, why don't you think about it? And then I think I got an invitation. I know I got some kind of an invitation from President Cray, and who had actually met. He'd come up to Yale Divinity School while I was there, because at that time they were doing the cooperative arrangement for some Lutheran students to have a year at Yale, or to have a year at the seminary here afterwards. And anyway, so Barbara and I came down in a car that a convertible, on a rather cold day that we had borrowed from a trustee at the Berkeley Divinity School at Yale. And I still remember getting onto Germantown Avenue with all its cobblestones and this old convertible sort of rattling away, and I was wondering, well, gee, what kind of a place am I coming to or something? But we arrived. Of course, the campus is lovely, and Phil Cray, the president, and Paul Rajashekar, and I think it was Tim Wengert were sort of the people who talked to us and so forth. And we were still a bit uncertain. One of the things that was attractive to us, just personally, is that our three sons live out on the East Coast, none in Philadelphia, but Massachusetts, New York, and Tampa, Florida. By that time we had one grandson, but prospects of perhaps others. So the idea of not only living out here, but possibly moving to Philadelphia or the East Coast again, with friends in Princeton and so forth, was attractive to us. But anyway, so we were debating, thinking about it. I realized that I really liked the idea of getting back to teaching again. And so when somebody was willing to offer me an opportunity to teach, I said, well, I'm interested, and Barbara, for those variety of reasons, was interested. So one of the things I remember so well is I think it was, I said, you know, I do know a fair amount about Anglican studies. I've been traveled throughout the Anglican Communion and taught a little bit, but it's really not my scholarly field. And I think it was Paul Rajashekar who looked at me and said, well, you can teach whatever you want. And I said, well, that's the nicest thing anybody's ever said to me. And so we came, and I have, the years that I've been here, I've taught whatever I wanted in a way. I mean, I've taught courses in Anglican Studies and guided a number of Anglican students, Episcopal students that have been here. But I've also taught lots of other students, including many Lutherans, and I often laugh that I've learned at least, if I don't do it every class, at least once in the course to be sure and quote and mention Martin Luther so that I can establish my bona fides. And although I'm a cradle-born Episcopalian, like a lot of Americans, I'm pretty much of a mongrel, and I every once in a while remind people that my grandmother's mother on my mother's side maiden name was Minnie Mabel Munson. So I got a lot of Swedish in me, and from the Midwest, and there's no reason I can't be Lutheran too. So anyway, it was the possibility then developed rather quickly. I should pause and say that this was a new chair of Anglican Studies, a new position at the Lutheran Seminary. The money for it was provided by a couple. The man had died, and the woman had just died and left it as a legacy to the diocese with general purposes for education. And I think they were not people of great means, as I understand it. I talked to their rector at one point later, but I know she was a school teacher, and I think maybe he was too. But they left this nice legacy to the diocese for the purposes of education. And they had no heirs, so they could do that. And then the diocese thought about it and decided, probably, partly remembering and in honor of the fact that the seminary had once been here, and that they hoped that more Episcopal students could at least do some of their education here, those who needed to be educated locally, established the chair. And that was, I guess, shortly before I assumed the chair, probably in the spring of 2003 or something like that. Now, I think one of the appeals to teaching here has been the fact that the students, there's a good, real diversity in the student body, and a diversity of a number of kinds. Age, certainly, obviously male, female, now gay, straight, the fact that there are so many students here from a number of different denominations. The school has a strong Lutheran core of students and obviously tradition and faculty, and I think that's very important. But at the same time, partly I suppose because it's the only mainline seminary that is here in Philadelphia, but more than that, I think because they really wanted to have that kind of diversity, recognizing that that's awfully good for the education of their students, that they're after all going to be ministering, all of them, in diverse situations, and therefore to know people of different traditions. I would argue too that it really helps people to understand their own tradition and their own denominational beliefs and stresses better, because if you're in a school that just all, say, Episcopalians or all just Lutherans, you sort of take a lot of things for granted. But if there are other people there who say, why do you believe that, or why do you think that's so important, then it causes you to think about those things, and also to learn some of the insights and values of the traditions. Obviously, since I've been here, I've been trying to teach Lutherans and Presbyterians and a lot of other people, some of what I think are the values of Anglicanism. But, I can also see some of our shortcomings and also some of the things that we share in common that maybe we express somewhat differently but are so important. I have a pretty long experience myself of ecumenicity, because I was the head of our Episcopal seminary out in the West Coast, which was part of the Graduate Theological Union, which is ecumenical. Now that's a different kind of context, which you have different schools representing different denominations, but the whole Graduate Theological Union as a result, Jesuits, Franciscans, Methodists, Presbyterians, Unitarians, and so forth. You may have them in class, and the students at least have some experience of rubbing up, but here the ecumenicity takes place within the classroom, on campus, in chapel, and in the faculty as well, because it wouldn't be fair in some ways to invite these students of different traditions here unless there were faculty members who represented or at least knew something about those traditions as well. So it is, and I found that very attractive as well, a remarkably diverse faculty in every way. I'll tell you a story. This is a story about my wife. Barbara and I, when we first came here, our nice apartment wasn't quite ready for us, so we lived in Wiedemann, and Barbara was also doing some other things, so she hadn't gone to chapel with me on a Wednesday for maybe the first few weeks we were here. And so I finally said, honey, she said, sure. So we went to the chapel, and she came out, and Barbara's kind of, she's very smart and lovely, but a little feisty in a good sense too. And she came out, and steam was coming out of her ears. And I said, what's wrong? And she said, they stole our service. And I said, what? She said, that communion service was word for word, practically right out of the Book of Common Prayer. Well, how could they do that and things like that? I said, well, honey, actually not. I mean, it was a Lutheran service, but the fact of the matter is that there's Catholics and Lutherans and Episcopalians, and we share so much of the tradition, and especially our liturgical scholars have worked together for a long time. The services are very similar because we're actually using, the older materials and understanding it that way. And no doubt we've influenced each other too, as Lutherans and Episcopalians have in this country. No, she said, they stole our service. But yes, it is a lie. We do kid each other from time to time. Probably the person, you have to be a little bit careful when you kid Tim Wingert, but the person I've had a few lovely exchanges with. Episcopalians are sometimes accused of not getting it quite right about the works faith, works grace issue. That may be that there's a little bit too much emphasis on how we respond in terms of the term that is sometimes used is that we're semi-Pelagian, referring to old controversy back in the 4th and 5th century. A couple times I think Tim was, I don't know that he said it to me or I've said it to him, but we've kidded each other a little bit about whether this Anglican gets the full grace, faith alone issue quite right. And I probably would be willing to say, yeah, I may not get it quite right in the Lutheran terms, because theologically, of course it is complex. Tim Wengert knows that perfectly well too. But the whole question of how we respond to faith, and that we have some responsibility, doesn't earn us, but it's a kind of a dance, if you will, as the relationship of love must always be. You have to respond to love in order to know love, and the response is not a condition on that love, but nevertheless, you can't know that love without responding to it, and same with grace. So but there are several other Episcopalians here on the faculty, and of course we like to defend the honor and of the Episcopal Church, and so people would sometimes ask me, they say, well, what do you notice that is different here, and as far as the seminary is concerned? And I say, well, they do sing quite loudly sometimes. They've got, of course, some wonderful musical voices here, and so not that Episcopalians can't sing, but I mean Lutherans can really belt it out sometimes. And they do, from time to time, talk about Martin Luther. And we don't have anybody like that in the Episcopal Church. I mean, there's Hooker and various figures, but there's no central figure who you sort of come back to from time to time. So, but I have had so many instructive as well as friendly conversations with faculty here. When I arrived, and I've taught, and I've been on the faculty, I think, in one way or another, of 5 other seminaries, one in England and in this country. And so I know theological seminaries pretty well. And I was very impressed by the quality of the faculty here, and the friendliness and the acceptance into the role. It meant a lot to me, and I suppose it's, people say, why are you still here? And I suppose one of the main reasons is that we've made some very good friends and enjoyed the company and the relationships. Well, it certainly has changed. I mean, the facilities are much better in terms of the classroom and things. I'm old-fashioned. I do miss, in a way, some of we were all crowded in, and right here in the library, into some of these classrooms, and in the auditorium over there. And it certainly didn't have any good technology and so forth, and that. But the plans for the building of Brosman were underway, and then I've forgotten now, but probably after we'd been here for about a year, they started building Brosman. So things were kind of torn up for a while. But then the building was complete, and we had much finer classrooms acoustically and in other ways, less crowded. There was actually, as part of the establishment of the chair in Anglican Studies, there was a classroom that was dedicated to classroom 204 in Brosman. So I've done most of my teaching there. And although I'm not the world's most technologically proficient person, I did find ways to use the technology there. And fortunately, a number of the students do have those skills. And so I often teach rather interactively, and therefore to be able to play little video clips or to get online to do some things it has been very valuable. And I think everybody has found that to be true. It is a challenge, I think, especially for older teachers, to make the best use of that. And I would be the first to say I probably haven't made the best use of it. But maybe the students get some value out of being taught by somebody who's got the older skills, I hope, as well. I've taught I mean, in a sense, if I look back at my life in ministry, that probably been the major thing that I did. I started off as a parish priest, thought that's maybe what I wanted to do, but within 3 years I found myself teaching at a theological school in England, and then, as I say, I've taught in other seminaries and in universities. So I've had that's probably the longest part of my career, and so I've seen a lot of changes in teaching methods and so forth. I mean, when I first started teaching, I don't think we had copy machines. I realize that really makes me sound old, but that was an advance too. When you create handouts for students or things like that. So it's wonderful, and I wish I were younger in some ways, because it would be I can see all the advantages and things that you can do with technology. I so far have not taught online. And I think I just don't think I could make that switch very easily. I need my students. I need to be able to interact with them and talk to them and get to know them. And that's another thing I've liked here, is that the class size, I've had some classes maybe as many as 25 or 28 students, but oftentimes it's more 12, 15, and you can really get to know the students, and they can get to know you and each other. I'm a great believer in peer education, that a lot of good learning comes from the students interacting with each other, especially with bringing their different backgrounds. And since we have some older students here as well, they bring their life experience, and it's all helpful. And that's where the diversity is helpful too. If you have students, different denominations, different races, different ethnic groups, which is true here, that can be a challenge. Sometimes it's much easier to teach a homogeneous group of people, and that's when I first started off teaching. That's what I was doing. Primarily white, though there were some minority students, but primarily male and primarily in their 20s. So that's a lot different now. You could always learn things about teaching, and the student body is always changing. Their life experiences, the things they bring. I mean, every faculty member who's been around for any length of time will, tell you the experience of making reference to some big event or something, and then realizing, I can still remember, I probably was teaching undergraduates then, but making passing references to the death of President Kennedy, or then the death of Martin Luther King Jr., or the Vietnam War or something, and then realizing that I was talking to a bunch of undergraduates who weren't even born when that happened. Then I would try to remember in my own experience, being a very young man, born in 1935, I can remember people making references to the First World War and thinking what, incredibly old fogies they were, and why was anybody talking about the First World War? And I, would realize that was true of the students' experience too. Now, that doesn't mean that those things are irrelevant and it shouldn't be, but at the other hand, you really have to keep moving along to find out, what is relevant to their experience and what is important, not only in this country, but in international affairs and in intellectual ideas, and for that matter, music and art and so forth. And that's a real challenge to a teacher, and that's why you need your students, because and the peer experiences and things like that, because they're the ones who can often feed in. I teach courses on the parables, for instance, so one of the things I keep asking is, what stories does this make us think of? And if I think of the stories, I'll think of stories that, come from maybe a while ago, but they have stories that are from their own lives. That may come from a while ago, but are more contemporary with their experience. So one obviously wants to do that, but it's constantly shifting and changing. And again, one of the great opportunities and values that I think we have here at the Lutheran Seminary is that there is this diversity in the student body, as we've said, not race, ethnicity, but also age and different life experiences. I will say that is a challenge too to the teacher, because you have students, not necessarily, I mean, to some degree it's different ability because they, some of them don't have as strong an academic background as the others, especially those who may already be coming here with a lot of life experience, but maybe not as much schooling as some others. And I once was told when I first started teaching that one thing you should try to do is to find the middle of the class and then teach just a little bit above that so that you'll be a challenge. That'll be a challenge to the students. I found that harder here. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm boasting, but mind you, I have been spoiled. I mean, you know, I've taught people at Princeton, I've taught people at Yale and things like that, and obviously they're very selective in their admissions policies, and so you're going to get people who are very well academically prepared and probably, for the most part, very well motivated. The students here, I don't think it's that they lack motivation, but some of them don't have that kind of academic background. And so you can get a bigger spread. The number of the brighter students are as bright as anybody at Yale or Princeton or anybody else. But then you do get some of the students who, and you have to value what they bring, but you also have to encourage them to use the skills that they do have and bring them into the classroom and to share them with others. And maybe, at least I've found, you may have to spend a little bit of extra time with them. But you don't want to take time away from the bright ones to do that. So from a teaching point of view, it's a good thing, but I have found it a challenge too in my latter years of teaching. Again, I mean, students are varied, and so some students need a little bit more prodding or encouragement than others. But for the vast majority, and I use this word in a positive sense, this is a vocational school. And the great majority of people here are seeing some forms of ministry, perhaps ordained ministry in many cases, but other forms of ministry. So the things that you're teaching them are things that they need. And they recognize they need that. Right now I'm teaching this course on the parables and the healing stories, which I call stories of Jesus, stories that Jesus taught and spoke of, and then stories about Jesus and his healings and how they function as kind of parables too. One of the obvious points I make with the students, hey, you're going to use these. You're going to preach about these things. You're going to teach about them. And they're useful in other ways too. They're useful sometimes one-on-one in a pastoral way. But in any case, they're of value to you. And in many cases, the students already, have heard people preach about them, and or they maybe themselves had been on an intern year and so forth. So the motivation is pretty high to recognize that these biblical materials are essential, and the more that they can get into them and the more they understand them. I myself wrote a book one time called Many Things in Parables, and part of the point of it is that there are a lot of things there to teach and learn, and different perspectives. You can play the different parts and so forth. So one of the things I say to the students, with some humor in my voice, but serious intention, is that, you got a whole bunch of sermons here if you really pay attention and look at that, and you're going to need these sermons. But more than that, there are all ways to effectively bring these across to other people who themselves will be looking at these stories from different perspectives and have different questions. So the challenge that the teacher has of recognizing you're hearing them differently and you have different interests and so forth, when you are yourself in the task of presenting these to other people, they will be too. So that if you can see many things in parables, you will be able to more effectively communicate and elicit from them, as the good teacher does, their own thoughts and their own. So that's one of the reasons I like to do a course like that interactively, because as I stress that, at the end of this course, you're ready to be the teachers. So you're not going to just sit there and listen to what I have to say. or just what you get out of the books, but how are you going to then use those materials? So that's where their motivation comes in, because if for the most part, I don't have to get them to understand that. They already understand that. But I want to encourage them to understand that so that they see themselves as beginning to teach each other in the class and preparing themselves to be the ones who will pass these opportunities for learning and challenge along to others. Just on Monday, I was asked to preach in the chapel. And I invited some of my students from the class, I had even some students who had taken the class earlier, to come with me. And so when it came time for the sermon, the gospel lesson was on the story of the laborers in the vineyard, as it's called, the story of people who work for 12 hours in the vineyard, and then people are hired at different times, and then people only work 1 hour, and in the end they're all paid the same, which seems nice, that the people who only worked an hour would get this wonderful boon, as it were, and we sing Amazing Grace, but obviously the point of the parable in some ways is to put yourself in the shoes of the people who've worked for 12 hours, and even though they agreed and got presumably a fair day's wage, a denarius as it would have been at the time, they don't feel this way any longer. And so we acted out. We didn't tell people we were going to do this, but we had people do the various parts. That was the presentation of the gospel. And so people had to look at it from the point of view of people who'd worked all day for just 1 hour, worked for part of the day and so forth, and the people looking on this and wondering about what kind of a situation would this work in, and so forth and so on. So one of the things that I think that we talked about in class, we talked about a little bit in chapel that day, is that it doesn't seem to work in financial terms. I mean, business people would run their businesses this way. The labor unions wouldn't let you do this. So the parable seems to be suggesting, but there's some other way or place or metaphor or gesturing. What might that be? So that's where the students begin to, tell their own stories. And a lot of the stories will revolve around the situation of being in a setting where, even though there may be different forms of deserving and earning, and this gets very Lutheran, doesn't it? There's emphasis on grace and equality of grace. What people get is what they need, and they all get it together. And the one of the analogies, not the only one, but is in a family, where the children, no matter whether they're older or younger or working harder or what they do, they all get the love that they need. And children sometimes have difficulty understanding that. I sometimes point out, a mother was once asked which of her children did she love the most, and she says, well, I love the one who's down until she's up. I love the one who's sick until he's well. And that's, the way that our love, we try to reach out, like to the one lost sheep or something. And so the parables fit together in that sense. But then we went on, because we wanted to think about our present circumstances too, to say, hey, although it doesn't, not talking about money as such, it is talking about some kind of equality in life, in the church, of course, in the community, but maybe in the way we live together too. So we brought up the issue of wealth inequality in the country, not so much from the perspective that some people are getting a lot, but that some people are getting so little. And we talked about the airport workers here and the referendum that is coming up on May 20th to try to get them, I wish we could get them a living wage, but at least get them a higher minimum wage and some benefits. I mean, people who push the wheelchairs and handle the baggage and food services, $7.25 an hour, and they may not even get to take all that home, no benefits. So the contemporary stories, flowed in too, and that can happen in the classroom. In this case, it happened in chapel, but it already happened in the classroom too. One of the reasons I'm so interested, and it sounds like I'm boasting now, but it's just my own experience. We did this 15 years ago in Los Angeles. I remember being at the airport, leading the contingent to because the issue, of course, was the city was claiming that, well, we've subcontracted with these people. We can't control what they pay. We said, look, they're still, as it were, under city contract, and so I've been very interested in this issue. When one looks at the future of the church, one can speak of all the challenges that the church is facing now in a world that is very secular, in a society that is very secular. As often has been pointed out, we have to look at different cultures. Christianity is growing leaps and bounds in parts of the world. And one of the things that is happening in this country, which is interesting, is we get some of the blowback from the fact that Christianity is growing in other parts of the world. I was bishop in Los Angeles, and some of our congregations were full of people from Nigeria and Korea and other parts of the world who were first or second generation Christians who came to this country and really are eager to practice their Christianity. That wasn't all fortunate. I mean, Los Angeles is not easier necessarily, but I mean, it's such a growing place, but even there, we faced the 10, 15 years ago, we were facing the challenges that some of the small congregations, especially in areas that were changing, and then there's so much demographic shift and change, and not always a lot of brand loyalty, to the Episcopal Church. And as well known, the Episcopalians are not reproducing the way they should, so the numbers are dropping for that reason, if not others as well. So especially some of the smaller churches face challenges. Again, a lot of people who study churches pointed out some of the bigger churches are doing extremely well, partly because they can offer so much program and community. So one of the tasks seems to be to get some of the smaller churches to at least take on some of the characteristics or merge them or bring them together. Especially as it's true in the East, a lot of churches are maybe redundant in the sense that a lot of them were built when people walked to church, and people take the bus or take the car or find other ways to get to a church in this day and age. So it's always changing, it's always shifting, and one can be concerned. I think one should be concerned, especially the mainline churches, about the drops in numbers and so forth. But at the same time, one can always be hopeful too, especially if one finds at the heart of the faith the message that so many people not only need but want, and therefore to find ways to express that in a world that is technologically so different and people communicate so differently. I mean, a lot of people say, well, people, if they do go to church, they'll go to church online now. And that's fine if that'd be helpful, but for people to be able to come together, I in some ways I think the biggest challenge I find, and I certainly found this in a university setting where I was a university chaplain for a number of years, is that Christianity, I could say religion, I think it is true of most religions, but Christianity is a communal experience. If you look at the Bible, that's so true. I mean, we're not talking about saving individual people. We're talking about the people of God. We're not talking about my experience of religion. We're talking about our experience of faith and religion. And therefore, it seems to me for Christianity to really be at its best, it has to be a community experience. And I think our challenge is in a world which puts so much emphasis on individualism and individual rights. I'm not against individual rights, but what about the community's rights? What about our rights together? How do we live and share together? And to see not only our faith experience that way, but to see what is right that way, our if I may say, our moral experience that way. I'm all for individual good morals, but the morals that really count are the morals that we have together and that we share and that we express, and the values that we live out, and that's in one way or another a community experience, and that's what I think the future of Christianity, which I hope not optimistic about necessarily, because there are a lot of things that are challenging it, but I'm hopeful about, That's where Christians always have been, I think. And that means that we have to rely on the Spirit of God and not just our own devices, but we're certainly called upon to think about the best ways we can do that together. I love the cooperation between Lutherans and Episcopalians. Was involved in those conversations earlier, and we talked about all the good things we could do, and I've seen some of them done in my own diocese in Los Angeles with cooperation, campus ministries, hospital chaplaincies, and I think we're going to see more of that in the future. And we do share so much in common. I mean, being here makes one deeply aware of the fact that Lutherans and English-speaking people, the Lutherans, of course, many around this area were German-speaking people, but they were cooperating for a long time, and as we know, shared services, and in some ways, some of those congregations became mostly because of the English-speaking factor. And if I, go back into the teaching of Anglicanism and the Anglican chair, the profound influence of Luther and Lutheranism on the Reformation in England in the 16th century and so forth, that we do share so much in common. And so I kind of like the idea that the chair is a sign of this shared cooperation, and having the chair named after its first holder, the Episcopal bishop, lifts up that Lutheran Episcopal cooperation in ways that I find very helpful. Honors are honors, and I don't mean to just sound overly humble or something like that, but you recognize that what they're doing is honoring that tradition and so forth as much as anything else. And I said to my wife when I got this morning, it's funny why I'm not looking forward to this. I'm sort of, I don't know, embarrassed or something like that, but I am looking forward to seeing the people. And I know a number of Episcopalians are going to come, and the trustees and my faculty colleagues and some of the students, and that's what really excites me. So I hope the seminary feels good about it, but I feel good about it. But what is really to be prized, I think, is that cooperation and sharing that we've had together. Oh, well, Fred Borsch is getting on in years. I consider myself retired. I mean, nobody's paying me anymore. Don't get me wrong. I feel very fortunate. I don't have a lot of money, but I don't. We're very well off as far as I'm concerned. So I'm not concerned about that part of it. I'm not looking for other work or jobs. As long as I have my health and things, I'm glad to fill in where needed. I love to teach, and I think it's almost selfish. I love being around people that are younger, so I may continue to do that and find things that where I can be helpful that will interest me. I'll continue. I don't know how much writing I'll do. Now I'm boasting again, but I have written 7 books since I've been here. Some of them were material that I'd been working on before. And I've written things I've wanted to write. I just got done writing a second novel, and I've written a lot of poetry, and as well as some theology and things like that. So whether I'll continue to do that or not, I don't know, but we'll see what the future will bring. We may move here. We've been thinking about this for 10 years, and we just haven't been able to do anything about it. Fortunately, Barbara and I are on the same page. We dither in the same way, and we sometimes feel very sorry for ourselves because we have this home in Los Angeles, which is expensive to keep up, which we only live in probably less than half of the year, in a small apartment here. If you don't mind my being personal, we laugh because the main difference between the two homes, which are 2,500 miles apart, is that the house in Los Angeles has 3.5 bathrooms, and the one here has 1. It's honey, but as I say, we start to feel sorry for ourselves because we have to live in we live in both places, and then we feel, hey, we're the luckiest people around. We've got family, we've got people we love, we've got friends, things to do. But Philadelphia is very attractive to us, and for the family reasons, we could end up moving here. As you can probably tell, I'm an extroverted person, and therefore I sometimes I need people, and I sometimes can feel selfish about that, and Barbara does too. And so we've made a lot of good friends here. I mean, I'm not going to name names, but because I'll leave somebody out. But some of the members of the faculty and their spouses and things we're very close to, and have really enjoyed their presence. But I think it's also partly my own experience as being head of an institution, head of a diocese and things. Everybody's part of the community. And I will tell you, I probably have enjoyed, as much as anything else, our relationship with the staff members. And again, I won't name names, and some of them, have gone on to other positions or things like that. But some of them are our buddies. I get a great deal of fun talking to Vince, who's head of security. And by talking to Vince, I discovered that he was born and raised in Santa Monica and went to Santa Monica High School. And so every once in a while, I'll tell him about the weather out in Los Angeles, and we'll joke about that. But those things, I think it's very important for the institution. I know that because of again, being head of an institution, that in some sense you're all a team together, and as important as the faculty is, everybody else is important too, or else the place can't function.